Of chapter 3. And, do not plot harm against your neighbor who lives trustfully with you in verse 29. And do not accuse a man. We did that one, and we talked about the Japanese farmer in California who was taken into the concentration camp. And when he came back, his Christian neighbor didn't take advantage of him. He took care of him. Do not accuse a man for no reason when he has done you no harm. Okay. What would we call that in today's language? Do not accuse a man for no reason when he has done you no harm.
You're innocent till you're proven guilty. You're innocent till you're proven guilty. Yeah.
I know.
Whatever they call that.
But that's what the law says. Is that how they treat you? No. You got to prove yourself innocent, right? What do we call it in today's world? What's the G word?
Gossip.
Gossip. Read it again. Do not accuse a man for no reason when he has done you no harm. Okay. Is gossip usually first person?
No.
Gossip's usually talking about somebody else who did something to somebody else. And it's always they, and every once in a while I get tired of it and I say, okay, who's they? And all of a sudden the room gets quiet, you know. Who's they? I want to know who's telling these lies about my Christian brother. Who's they? And everybody just kind of slowly sneaks away. Gossip is one of the most damaging things in our culture. And bottom line is, it's not valid unless you saw it. Don't take anybody's word. What's that old saying? Believe nothing that you hear and only half of what you see. Why is that true? Nothing that you hear. Why is that true?
It's hearsay.
It's hearsay. It won't stand up in court. And do most people tell it straight? No, they build it up, add to it, and embellish it, because the story gets better and people get more interested in. You're in the spotlight then. Everybody's paying attention to you, and hey, they're liking this, so you keep talking and keep talking. The next thing you know, the whole thing's fabricated. 31 to 32.
Do not envy a violent man or choose any of his ways, for the Lord detests a perverse man, but takes the upright into his confidence.
Okay. Do not envy a violent man or choose any of his ways. Okay. Why not?
He's a bad influence.
Keyword's envy. Why would we envy a violent man? What would be a good reason for envying? What would be a logical reason for it? There's no good reason to envy a violent man. What would be a logical reason for finding yourself in that situation?
Well, if he's a violent man, if he's rose to any kind of power at all, or any kind of wealth at all, or any kind of material, whatever.
You hit the big two.
I mean,
Well, you're getting good, Jason.
Proverbs is for the simple-minded.
Well, you're
Now I'm 3 for 3.
You're paying great tribute to it. What's the two biggest problems in the world? Power and money. What's the Bible say is the root of all evil?
Money.
Money. And what does money always lead to well, not always. In most situations, where does money usually lead a person?
Downfall.
Power. Power is a result of not being able to control money's power over you. And once you get the money, you start manipulating the system. Start paying off the judge, and paying off the lawyers, and paying off the town council to get what you want. And does violent always mean you do somebody bodily harm? Yeah. There's been a lot of, the last 5 years, there's been a lot of stories in the news about eminent domain. You know what eminent domain is?
Yeah, where they come in and take your property.
They take your property for the common good.
They say it's common good.
Yeah, they say it's common. I remember when I was in Indianapolis carrying mail, I used to hunt ducks on Geist Reservoir. And they were just building Geist Reservoir. That kind of tells you how old I am. And they started taking these farmers' property at Geist Reservoir so that they could build this reservoir so that there could be water for the city and a huge park so you could get away from it all. Right on the edge of Indianapolis. Have you been to Geist Reservoir?
How would you ever get away from Indianapolis?
Huh?
If you was in Indianapolis?
It's right up to it.
Oh, okay.
But it was supposed to be a nature preserve. It was supposed to be hiking trails. It was supposed to be, the people of Indianapolis could go there and get away from it all. And it was, you could hunt and you could fish. And have you been to Geist Reservoir?
It's fancy.
There's not a house on Geist Reservoir that doesn't cost $500,000. And there's 1 million of them. And it was, the whole thing, they violently took away all these farmers' property so they could make billions upon billions upon billions of dollars, not only of water, but all these. Do you know what a shore lot property costs? Before you build a house or anything, just buying a piece of ground that touches the water. You know what the starting price is?
Probably $200,000.
How much?
$200,000.
75,000 is the starting. It depends on how much frontage you have, but I have absolutely no doubt some of them were $200,000. So what was it really about? The people of Indianapolis having good water and a place to get away from it all, or a bunch of developers taking advantage of the farmers that used to own the property? They took it all, eminent domain, gave them about 20, 30 cents on the dollar for it, and then turned it into the biggest housing project in Indiana. There's not a house on Geist Reservoir that's worth less than $200,000. None. They took it. They just snatched it away from them and took it. It was all about money and power. 33 to the end.
The curse of the Lord is in the house of the wicked, but he blesses the habitation of the just. Surely he scorneth the scorners, but he gives grace unto the lowly. The wise shall inherit glory, but shame shall be the promotion of fools.
Yeah. Do you know anybody that's got a lot of money that's happy?
Sometimes it's really hard to tell.
Then they're not happy.
You know what I'm saying? I mean, you see them and they're always doing their own thing or whatever, but you don't see them when they're not. I mean, I don't.
But even when I see them and they're pleasant, they have you looked at President Obama after 5 years in office? Most powerful man in the world. He looks like he's aged 30 or 40 years. I mean, they were showing him, the other day they were showing some of his campaign speeches before he went in, which was just 5 years ago. And he looks like he's aged 30 or 40 years. He looked like a little teenage kid when he was running for office. And now he looks like he's 60 years old and suffering. All that power, you know, you'd think that it would be exhilarating and you could have the best of the best and prosper. George Bush was the same way, and so was Clinton. That office claims your life. It's really stressful. And most rich people that I know who have a lot of money, I'm not talking about, I mean, let's face it, we're all rich. We've got it better than, we're in the upper 5% of the world when it comes to wealth. Even the most common person in this country. But I'm talking about the billionaires and the millionaires. I've told you before, one of the Walmart daughters lives in a place in Texas, $1 billion estate. And when you fly over it, there's this big green spot out in the middle of this gray desert. She hadn't been out of her. Now this was back in the late 90s. I read this, but at that point in time, she hadn't been out of her house in 9 years. She was locked up in that house. And tell me, what good is being a billionaire if you're afraid to come out of your house? They're not happy, they're cursed. The money becomes a curse. Very, 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 very few lottery winners that don't end up being, their family life ends up being a total disaster. Most of them get divorced within 3 months. The only person that wins is the lawyers. And then the money's all gone, they have no retirement, and they got a bunch of stuff they can't afford, and they have to start selling it off for 10 cents on the dollar. And the one here in Indianapolis ended up on the county crew. Nothing wrong with being on the county crew. But you'd think if I won the lottery and had a better estate, you would think I wouldn't be better before I got it than after I had spent it all. Wouldn't you? It just very, very seldom ends up that way. The money becomes the God. No. I thought you were sure. Okay. Lord's curse is on the wicked. He blesses the home of the righteous. Do you feel blessed? No? You know me? No?
Sometimes.
You know Jennifer? Could it be worse?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I've been worse.
So do you feel blessed? Am I getting through?
Yeah.
I'll ask you again in a minute. Think about it. You laugh all the time. He mocks the proud mockers and gives grace to the humble. This whole book is about wisdom, okay? What's the Bible say about God's wisdom and man's wisdom in the New Testament? What's the Bible say? God's wisdom is foolishness unto man, and man's wisdom is foolishness unto God. Okay? How do you think Gideon felt when God said, here's the battle plan? Send the 40,000, 45,000 soldiers home and just keep 300 of them. Then I want you to attack the Philistines. There's only 125,000 of them down there. And here's the plan of attack. Get up on the hills around the camp so that they'll be able to see you and get a good shot at you. Blow the trumpet, wake them up in the middle of the night. Break the pitcher, the water pitcher, and hold up your torches so that they'll see where to shoot the arrows. If a general in the military in the United States was to come to you and say, this is our battle plan, this is what we're going to do, what would be your first thought, Jason?
It involves, here's your sign.
Here's your sign. I'm going home. I mean,
There's just one way you test a shark bite suit.
think about that now. Does that make any sense at all to us in this life? And Gideon said, let me see if I got this right. And so he tested that for 2 nights, and then what did he do? He laid out the fleece one night and he said, let there be dew on the grass but not on the fleece. And that's exactly what happened. And he kind of scratched his head and said, now don't get mad at me, but let's do this again. He laid out a fleece, and the next night there was dew on the fleece but not on the grass. And then what did he do? He picked up his pitcher and his torch and his horn, and he said, come on fellas, we're going to go conquer the Philistines. There's only 125,000 of them. And what did these 300 troops do?
Followed.
They said, okay, if that's what God said, that's what we're going to do. What if you were one of the 300 troops? Would that be your attitude? Now, I don't think one of them went up on that hillside without chills going down their back. I mean, let's face it, we're human, and those guys knew all about battle. And yet, they said, well, if that's what God wants, let's go do it. And what was the end result? The Philistines woke up so confused, they thought they were being attacked, and they killed each other. And what few were left, Gideon chased them to the river and slaughtered them on the banks of the Jordan. Does that sound like a wise plan to you? Trick question, right?
That's one of those that's crazy enough to work.
When you're up on that hill, you hope it's going
Yeah, exactly.
You know, at some point in time, we have to say to ourselves, well, if that's really what God's want, it must be right. I don't understand it, but here I go.
Yeah.
And when you get to be 67 years old and you've been through it 400 or 500 times, you get to where, okay, we'll do it again. I don't see how this is going to work, but it worked last time and it'll work the next time, and so I'm going to do it this time again. And you know, he's never failed me. Never. The wise are in honor, but fools he holds up to shame. Okay. Now, do these verses right here, are those necessarily for this world? When he says, the Lord's curse is on the house of the wicked, is that necessarily going to be in this life? No, but it will. A lot of people don't get their justice in this life because it's not a just world and the system is corrupt. But God will have an accounting one day, and whether we like it or not, when somebody gets away with stealing our land and turning it into a $1 billion housing project, in the next life, they've got nothing coming and I've got a mansion waiting. And this life is short compared to the next. All right, wisdom is supreme. This is chapter 4. Somebody read 1, 2, and 3, and 4.
Listen, my sons, to your father's instructions. Pay attention and gain understanding. I give you sound learning, so do not forsake my teaching. When I was a boy in my father's house, still tender, and only a child of my mother, he taught me and said, lay hold of my word with all your heart. Keep my commands and you will live.
Okay. Why, this has a kind of a pleading aspect to it. He's sort of begging his son to listen to it. Why would Solomon be begging his son to listen to it? Wisest man in the world, right?
I think all kids are the same. You pretty much gotta beg them to listen to you.
Say it again?
I said, I think all kids are the same. You pretty much gotta beg them to listen to you, and then they still don't. So.
Yeah, but Solomon had a particular problem. You're exactly right. When we're all teenagers, we're trying to break free from the bonds and be our own man. But Solomon had a particular problem. What was it? The wisest man in the world that
He had
spent most of his
900
life acting
wives.
like a fool. And what is he saying here? He's saying, listen, boys, do as I say, not as I do. And how often does that work? How often can they look at you and say, yeah, I know you don't want me to do that, but don't you do it on a pretty regular basis?
Tell us a story, Logan.
Not.
It's probably one of those times we don't want the kids in here. but have we ever found ourselves in that situation? Don't raise your voice. Yeah, well, you were yelling at Mom all day yesterday.
I hear it all the time. I want to be just like you, Dad. I want to do everything you do. And I'm like, oh, man. He says that all the time.
Caution,
Where you look? No, you don't.
caution. They're going to grow up to be just like us. So, the best thing we can do is say, look, I'm not perfect, and I make mistakes. And yes, I did yell at your mother all day yesterday. But I was wrong, and I know I'm wrong, and I'm trying to keep you from being wrong. And then it becomes a personal testimony and not just a lecture. At some point we have to say, you know, you're right, but I don't want you to have to make the same mistakes I've made, and I don't want you to have to suffer the things that I've had to suffer. So don't do that. Please don't do that. Because I have found out that it doesn't work. And you think that might work better than, you know, Solomon's saying here, and if you go into Ecclesiastes, which is right after this, Solomon's saying to his kids, you know, I just told you all this stuff about wisdom, but I am a mess, and I've been a mess my whole life, and I'm afraid you're going to end up a mess too. Now that's my paraphrase of it, but that's exactly what he's saying. He says things like, whoa, 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 all is falling. And this is when he's in his last years and he's looking back on his whole life, the greatest king that ever lived, the richest man that ever lived, and the wisest man that ever lived, and he's saying, I've been such a fool. And what was the end result? His sons went to war and Israel was split right in half. And they acted just like it. Pick it up there next week.